Hey, welcome back to the channel. My name is Troy Mayers and I am pumped to have you here. Today, we review the Canon R7, the good, the bad, everything in between. So, let's get after it. Let's not waste any of your time and get right into some of the specs of the Canon R7. Now, if you watched any of my videos, then you know I think that a camera body, first and foremost, is designed to hold and house a sensor. So let's start with the sensor on the R7, and we're getting a 32.5 megapixel Super 35 sized sensor. I think that the 32 megapixels falls in a real sweet spot, especially for a camera like the R7, which is designed to be a hybrid photo video camera in the first place. And I've mentioned in another video that I'll link up here on the screen now for you. There's a sweet spot, in my opinion, for hybrid cameras. There are definitely cameras that have a higher megapixel count, something like the R5 is 45 megapixels, and that's great, but it makes the camera lean a little bit heavy towards the photo side and less towards the video, and vice versa. There are cameras with lower megapixel counts that, again, make it a little bit more video heavy and you lose out on the photo side. So I think that the 20 to 30 megapixel range is the real sweet spot for a hybrid camera. So this coming in at 32.5 megapixels, I think is a great spot for it to be as a photo video camera. All right, the next spec to kind of talk about here is going to be the IBIS. So this camera does have IBIS, internal body image stabilization, which I was very surprised to find when I saw the R7 get announced, especially at the price point that it comes in at and the size as well. To fit IBIS in here is really impressive, and we get 5 stops of shake correction, shake reduction, just in the body itself. If we pair this with a image stabilized lens, the two systems are able to communicate together and give us even greater performance, upwards of 7 and 8 stops, depending on the lens you stick on the front. The IBIS is incredible. I can't believe that hand holding a 70 to 200 is feasible, and I do it all of the time. And that shouldn't be the case, but the fact that it is just incredible. So we've got the IBIS, 5 stops in camera. The next spec to just talk about quickly is 4K 60, okay? We're getting 4K resolution up to 60 frames per second. All of that with no record limits and no overheating in my use cases. That sentence alone should excite a lot of Canon users out there, because we've often been crippled by a 30-minute record limit, and then with the R6 and R5, overheating was the next deal. So the fact that we're getting 4K 60 with no record limits and no overheating, that speaks for itself. That's all I have to say about the topic. Moving on, we do also get dual SD card slots, which is, again, great and usually reserved for higher end cameras, but the ability to redundantly record here in this body, real plus in my opinion. Another huge plus for me, especially if you've seen some of my other videos, and I'll link to it here, RF mount on the front. I love the RF mount. I mean, I love it. It is the reason why I am using Canon cameras. This is able to use full frame RF lenses, which I'm investing in, but it also paved the way for a new lineup of lenses from Canon, the RF-S line, that are going to be designed for cameras like this, the R7, the R10, maybe a couple other ones in the future. Last 2 things to talk about on specs and features. It's a compact camera. I mean, this is even smaller than an R5 or an R6. That was a big one for me. We're getting all of those features in this compact size for a compact price. I just came up with that on the spot. The compact size for a compact price of $1,500. Let's go. Enough said. So that first chapter is a bit of a crash course of the specs and features to get us all up to speed and on the same page. This next little bit here is going to be the distinguishing factors for me, the reasons why I bought this camera for myself, for my production company. If you hadn't guessed by the subscriber count of this video as of current, nobody is sponsoring this channel, so I bought this camera with my own money. And one of the primary reasons I did that is because of the ability to shoot in C-Log 3 to best match my C70. I'm using this kind of as a B cam to my A cam. C-Log 3 and the ability to record indefinitely with that unlimited record time. those kind of two things together really piqued my interest, apparently enough to get me to buy it, right? A couple other distinguishing factors for the R7, having IBIS inside of it, like I mentioned earlier, I didn't expect to see that in this camera. The way that I use it is very handheld. It's either living on a set of sticks as a B cam, or I'm just running around with it because it's lighter and I'm sticking it in weird places. So getting that IBIS has proven very helpful for me from a handheld footage perspective. And I guess the last distinguishing factor as to why I bought it is going to be the size and the price, more so the size. I'm a bit of a minimalist filmmaker, and I would love for the day to come where I can fit my entire production kit in my bag, in one bag. I'm getting there. I can fit all my camera equipment in a bag, and I can do that because my B cam is the R7. I would love an R3 as a B cam, but it's much bigger and it's just not gonna fit in my bag. And as silly as that may sound, that's important to me. So the size is great and the price is even better. Let's take a tour of the camera. When I'm watching gear reviews of equipment that I'm considering purchasing, which is often, I want to get a sense for what it's going to be like when I hold it for the first time. So I'm going to give you that because I'm just here to create videos that I would want to watch, right? So let's take a look at the R7. And we'll start with the back of the camera because as camera operators, that's what we're going to be looking at the most. So we'll start with the flip out LCD screen. I think it's plenty sufficient for what you need it to do. The fact that it can swivel all the way around is great. There are still cameras that are not doing this. I think that should be, at this point, a standard on all cameras. So it's just great to see, and I love having that flip out LCD screen. You're gonna see on the back of the camera a pretty familiar Canon layout if you've shot on Canon mirrorless cameras before. Nothing too fancy or new here. It just gets the job done. It's tried and true. The thing that you are gonna find that is different and pretty well unique to this camera is a thumb wheel up here on the top, right, just to the right of the viewfinder. This is kind of a new one that Canon is, I would say, testing out on this camera. This is something they might be including in future cameras, maybe an R1 one of these days. But they wanted to, I would guess, kind of test it out here because they can get some real world feedback on it. My real world feedback is that it seems to be a pretty nice addition. It certainly beats the touch bar of the Canon R at one point. We all kind of remember that. I didn't hate the touch bar necessarily, but this is better. I do like having this ability with the thumb wheel, and we have a joystick that we can use to navigate menus and autofocus points. So overall, I think it's great. One other differentiating factor here that I would have liked to have seen maybe on a future camera, around the quick menu button towards the bottom, we get a D-pad, a directional pad, instead of the traditional scroll wheel. We actually just have two custom scroll wheels on this camera. It helps keep the size compact, but there are three aspects of our exposure, right? Our shutter speed, our aperture, and our ISO. And I would love to have a custom wheel for each one of them. It's really a non-issue, but I would love to have seen another scroll wheel around the quick menu like we've seen on other cameras. Let's move over to the left side of the camera now. On the left side of the camera, you're gonna find a very familiar Canon port layout, at least for their mirrorless cameras, which also means that we unfortunately get the Canon flaps, the ones that are attached by one little point in the corner, and they flop around in weird places. You can't keep them open when you want them. You can't shut them when you want to. I would love to see doors on here that is opened in a traditional sense. Never particularly like the flaps, but again, not the end of the world. So we have a 3.5 millimeter mic input. Below that, we have a remote import. I actually don't use that. I wasn't sure what was there. I don't use that often. A headphone out. This is great if you are monitoring audio that's being captured by this camera. Having the headphone out port so you can actually hear what's going on instead of trying to use the speakers that are built into the camera. Dedicated headphones are gonna give you a much better reproduction of the sound you're capturing. So you have that. The last flap hides a USB-C port as well as a micro HDMI. Micro HDMI, we all hate it. It's on all the cameras. Would love to see something different. At least mini HDMI is better, but it's a compact body. There's no excuse for micro HDMI on the R5 or the R3, in my opinion. I guess I don't know what's in the cameras. I'm sure there's a reason for it, but gosh, micro is not very usable. So it is what it is. That is the left side of the camera. We'll move on to the top of the camera now. On the left side, as you hold it, you have a camera strap. Right down the middle, you have a multi-interface hot shoe. Just to the right of that is a function dial. I'm a fan of the function dial. I like to see that on a camera. I've always been preferential to a dedicated dial for this instead of something in the menu system. I take the time to set up my custom shooting modes based on the modes that I use most frequently, obviously. So I like being able to physically switch between those quickly without having to dive into a menu. So that's great to see. We're going to come back to this in just a second when we get a little further down. But just to the right of that, we have a lock button to lock the different buttons on the camera so nothing gets messed up. Then we have the on-off switch, and you'll notice that it is a little bit more than just an on-off switch. It is on-off and video mode. So we have a dedicated switch between photo and video mode. I love this for a couple different reasons. The first one being, again, I mentioned us preferential to dials as opposed to digital menu systems. I don't have to go into a menu system to switch between photo and video mode. Love that. Additionally, it makes my function dial a little bit more helpful for the way that I shoot. I can set up custom shooting modes 1, 2, and 3 for video, and then by switching the actual hard dial, when I switch over to photo sides of things, I can set those custom shooting modes 1, 2, and 3 for photo purposes, which makes that dial very helpful for me. So I love to see the actual dedicated switch. Moving on, we do have a button labeled ISO, and this is the button that I use to change my ISO. I have my wheels mapped for my shutter speed and my aperture. I try not to adjust my ISO. I try to keep it at the base of the native ISO for what I'm shooting in. So it's kind of my last resort when I absolutely have to. That's why I've got it mapped to require 2 different buttons to adjust. I'm okay with that, but again, having the third customizable wheel somewhere would be even a little bit better. There is a dedicated record button, as well as, like I mentioned before, that customizable wheel that I have mapped to my shutter. There's a multifunction button just next to the shutter and then the actual shutter. That'll be the top of the camera. Let's move on. On the right side of the camera, we're gonna have to spend a little bit of time here to get through everything. We have the SD card slot. That's about all. 2 SD cards. It can use UHS-2, which means we can go up to V90 cards. I already have a bunch of V90 cards for my C70 to be able to record in RAW. So I just pop the extras in here, and I've got plenty of speed and buffer for shooting 4K 60 and C-Log3, as well as keeping up with some of the higher frame rates that we get on the photo side of things with this camera. Specifically, if we shoot in electronic shutter mode, we get that frame rate. Sorry, I didn't know it off the top of my head, but it's here for you guys, and I learned it as well because of this video. So that is the right side of the camera. We'll move on to the front of the camera, and I'm going to take the lens off for this. All right, front of the camera, we have another new addition to the R7 that I think is kind of a test run for future cameras, and that is this autofocus, manual focus dial. It's a cool idea, especially because this is a Super 35 sensor and it is introducing these RFS lenses. So far, and there's not a lot of RFS lenses out there, but so far, none of the RFS lenses have an actual autofocus, manual focus switch on the barrel. It is not there. So without a dial like this autofocus, manual focus one, we'd have to go into the menus to switch between manual and autofocus. And you know that I don't like to go into menus if I don't have to. So I like to see this. This is cool. Truthfully, I don't use it because I have full frame lenses and they have it on the lens itself. And that's where my muscle memory takes me, and I use that. But it's cool to see. Then in the middle of that autofocus, manual focus switch is another customizable button. And again, I have this turned off. I do have larger hands. You might not know this via video, but I'm 6.5 feet tall, and with that comes some pretty big mitts. So when I hold this camera, it's pretty easy for me to accidentally actuate that button. So I just turned it off, but it might be very helpful for you. And then again, on the front, we have the RF mount, and you guys know that I'm a big fan of that. I think I linked the video before, but if not, I'll do it again here, whatever. Talking about the RF lenses, so pretty pumped about that is another reason that brought me here to the R7. That just leaves us with the bottom of the camera. And again, not a lot to talk about here. There's one single 1/4-20 thread in the middle of the camera without any other holes or anchor points for tripod plates, be that Arca Swiss or Manfrotto, and that sucks. I'm kind of particular when it comes to the way I set up rigs in my bag and things of that nature. And I want everything to be like rock solid. And knowing that I'm relying on friction to keep my camera from spinning, be that on a gimbal, on a tripod, what have you, I don't like that. It's probably not a huge deal. I just don't personally like that. So I'll have to get some type of cage for this, I think, to help settle that just within myself. So just know there's one 1/4-20 mount on the bottom. Also on the bottom is the battery door. This camera uses Canon's newest LPE6 NH and below. So that's great. You're getting some really great battery life out of this camera, IBIS included, that oftentimes eats up some battery. I've been really impressed thus far with how long I've been able to shoot it. And that's gonna complete our tour. Let me just make sure. Yeah, that's gonna do it. That's the physical walk around. Let's move on to the actual monitor interface. We'll get the camera turned on here, and it turns on very quickly. We're talking 2 or 3 seconds before it's ready to fire bangers. That's great. I had a Komodo for a while, and that took like 30 seconds to get turned on. And I knew that was gonna be the case when I bought it, but I had no idea how frustrating that would be. So this turns on quick. You're immediately greeted with the whatever you set as your first screen. I have mine set, as you can kind of see here, with an overwhelming amount of information on it. It's got just about all of the details that I would need to know for my shoot. And again, we're looking at this in video mode. I shoot videos primarily. This will change if you're in photo mode based on how you want to set it up. But I get to see what my autofocus settings are, what my SD card status is, the frame rate and resolution that I'm shooting in, as well as all my exposure settings and my histogram as well. So got everything we want there. Hitting the info button once will take you over to your next custom on-screen display. I have mine stripped away quite a bit so I can start to see my image more. As I set up my camera at the start of my shoot, I like to see all of those details right away. Once I know everything is good and I've double checked, I usually drop over to this more stripped away view so I can see the image better, or clicking it a third time, I've got it just completely clean so I can see just the image without any on-screen displays. So that's what you'll see mostly when you pop open this camera and turn it on. Hitting the quick menu button pulls up, you got it, the quick menu. This lets you adjust what your autofocus settings are, and you can customize actually in the actual menu system what gets displayed on your quick menu. And you can also turn off a lot of things, which I don't think was common on previous Canon mirrorless cameras. Someone correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But I really like the ability to take tools off of this because, like I mentioned earlier, being a minimalist filmmaker is kind of my jam right now. And I try to just take away as many decisions or distractions just in life in general as I can. And that trickles its way all the way down into my quick menu system. So I just have the things available that I am not able to use a customized physical button for. These are the things that I use and want to access most frequently. That's the quick menu. Then the last thing to kind of take a look at is the actual deep dive menu. This is everything that you could ever want to do with this camera. We're not going to go through everything step by step. If you've used Canon cameras in the past, you know exactly what this menu looks like. This is where that new thumb wheel up on the top by the viewfinder is kind of nice. It's a great way to navigate through the menu, I find. You could also tap and touch through the menu as well. Should you so choose, I go 50-50 myself. So yeah, that's the Canon menus. They're fine. They're definitely better than some menu systems out there. Sony. So Sony's getting better too. We're getting it figured out. It's a good time to be alive as a filmmaker, as a camera operator. We're living in a good time. We got some good stuff to work with. I set up. I go through and set up again in here my own menu pages, custom pages. Usually for like my project settings is what lives on my first menu page. And again, I tried not to deep dive into the rest of the menu system on a job. When I'm here in the studio, I'll mess around with it and deep dive, especially when I first get it. But I try to keep everything I might need on a job, on a page shoot, on that first page. So it's great to have that. The My Menu system still lives on here. The last thing I wanted to touch on as it relates to our monitor is going to be some of our assisting tools, exposure or focus assist. We have a couple here. It's not quite as full-fledged as some of the cinema cameras are, but we have the essentials. We've got a histogram. I don't particularly like histograms myself, but it's what we have to work with, so we're going to use it. We also, from an exposure side of things, we have zebras, and I've got a custom button mapped to that. I have the multi-function button up by the shutter mapped to my zebras. And because I'm shooting in C-Log3, I actually have my zebras mapped to 45% plus or minus 5, and I find that will zebra most skin tones really pretty well for me from an exposure perspective, so I like to see that. The last assist tool is going to be the peaking assist. The focus peaking is great and helpful, especially if you're shooting manual focus. The autofocus is great, but if you're not able to use it for whatever reason, and there's plenty of reasons not to use autofocus, the peaking is reliable. That's going to be it for the monitor. I'm going to reference my notes to see what the next chapter is. We'll pick back up here. All right, so it looks like the next section that I have mapped out for us is just my real-world experience using this camera for a couple months now that I've had it. The first thing I wanted to touch on was my experience with the autofocus. This gets Canon's, or the CMOS dual pixel autofocus 2. The C70, the R5C gets DPAF 1. This gets 2, and 2 is the good one. 2 is the one that you want, and it's proven itself to be very reliable. And that's an important term when it comes to autofocus, is the reliability of it. All right, the next thing has been the battery life. Battery life also has been great. That's been a pretty hot topic again with the R5C with the battery. Battery's been great. I'm getting 2 to 3 hours out of the battery, which is right on par with what I need it to be for my use cases. So good to go there. And then overheating. Again, not an issue here. I don't think it's something that you need to worry about with this camera. Hopefully that is behind us. Knock on wood. No overheating issues here with the R7. And the last bit of real-world experience that I have with this camera, I wanted to share that I did not expect out of this camera. I don't even think I knew that it was a feature of the camera, and that is auto horizon level. And this is a cool one. Let's say we've got our camera up on our tripod, and we know we all try really hard sometimes to get our horizons level and our lines straight. And that's hard to do on the tripod. And usually the bubble level is like under the camera, and you try to like peek under there, and you get it as close as you can and fix it in post later if you need to, right? Auto level is cool. It takes advantage of the fact that it's got IBIS built into it, and that IBIS allows that sensor to move. And if you have it turned on and you set your camera up on a tripod, and let's say the tripod isn't perfectly level, because that sensor is free floating to an extent, it will level out your horizon. And I think that's awesome. I didn't realize it was what was going on for a little bit until I saw it actually. I turned it off and turned it back on and saw the adjustment that it was making. And I think that's really cool. Obviously, there's a certain limitation. You can't be 45 degrees on an angle and expect your sensor to fix itself for you. You got to give it a little bit of a chance here, but that's a nice one to get you that last little bit to keep you straight. So I love the auto level feature. Now, of course, there are a couple cons that come with this camera. I touched on it earlier. Gosh, I don't like just having 1/4 20 mount on the bottom. That may feel like a very small con to you. Hopefully it is. I'm gonna have to get a cage, find some solution. If you have a solution, if you have this camera, or have heard of a solution, let me know. I'd love to figure out what that is that still keeps it compact, because that's gonna be pretty important to me. And the other con is gonna be the micro HDMI. That's not something that I can rely on or use professionally for anything really. So again, maybe there's a cage option out there that provides a little bit of extra support for the micro HDMI cable, and it might give me better mounting options on the bottom. So I might be able to kill two birds with one stone. Those are just some of my gripes about the camera since I've been using it, and wanted to share those with you guys. And that's my real world experience with the camera. If you have a specific question about something, of course, drop it down in the comments and I'll get back to you right away. I'm in the comments all the time, right? So let's have a conversation down there. If you have some questions about this camera, fire away. There is one thing I wanted to make clear about the R7, at least for me, and it goes back to the distinguishing factors from earlier in the video. And to briefly recap a couple of those, this overall size and ease of use, this compact form factor is great. The incredible Super 35 sensor and the ability to shoot 4K in C-Log3 with no record limits. Those are very important to me because the sole purpose of the R7 in my arsenal is to act as a B cam to my Canon C70. So let's head over to the next video where I talk about how the two cameras play together. And I'll give you guys my experience in detail as to just how well the R7 does as a B cam to the C70, all right? Look forward to seeing you in the next video.